Thanks for staying with us tonight. The Democratic Alliance says it will abstain from voting in tomorrow's motion of no confidence in President Cyril Ramaphosa for his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. The motion was tabled by the African Transformation Movement, and the DA believes it is a frivolous move. However, the official opposition says the decision to abstain from the vote doesn't mean that it will not hold the president accountable. The party says it's waiting to see if Ramaphosa will implement his economic reform strategy outlined in October. Meanwhile, UDM leader Bantu Holomisa has also tweeted that the party will not be participating in that motion. Well, in Gauteng now, we take a look at some of the changes to the provincial government. Notable among them are the appointments of a new health MEC to replace Dr. Bandile Masuku, who was dismissed in October over the personal protective equipment tender scandal. Well, to wade through the reshuffle that we've seen today, we're joined by former Gauteng Premier Mbazima Shilowa. Mr. Shilowa, good evening, and thank you so much for your time. The Gauteng Premier, David Makhura, would have us believe that this decision was made purely and solely in the interests of the residents of Gauteng. But of course, it's much more complex than that, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's always complex, especially when you have had to ask someone to resign from the position, as well as asking someone to resign in the legislature. But on the other hand, he is correct, because I think generally what the ANC PEC or the officials would do is to agree on a broad principle of what needs to be done, what kind of people or persons, and then leave him free to decide on who the people will be. But obviously, he will still have to consult with them. But the decision is his and his only. Obviously, you know, there may be politics sometimes, but generally, the Premier is able to make the decision in the best interest of the province.
There's been a lot of talk that the Premier doesn't necessarily find himself in a completely secure position, and therefore whatever is being said by the different parties he's having to consult with carries a lot more weight than perhaps it would have previously. When it comes to the individuals that have been chosen, I imagine that it wasn't just in the interests of this moment in terms of the replacements, but that politically there's also a strategy that is unfolding here.
I'm not sure about that strategy, because if you remember, Pakistan is already one of the top 5 officials in the province. So he's already involved in the key issues of the political running thereof. But obviously, it does help when you have as many of your officials as is possible and permissible available in the executive, because they also help bring political stability in there, you know. So, I mean, I look at it as more that because there is now an opening, and because they had to move someone who is already in the executive, and he may have looked and find that he doesn't have enough arsenal for him to be able to deploy them, he has had to go to national to say, well, we've got people like Barbara Creasing, like Pakstau, like Robert Papela. I think we need this one person. And they would have had to be horse trading before national government could agree that he can be able to have him. But obviously, he would have had to go through the national office of the ANC first.
You've spoken about, you know, the decision, the complexity that arises, especially where some people have to vacate their posts. Let's talk about the ANC Youth League, you know, and the Premier wouldn't confirm who exactly the individual is. But of course, we understand that Thulani Ndlovu is the person that was asked to resign from being a member of the legislature. And we've seen the ANC Youth League statement on this matter that says, well, this idea of young people making way for their elders effectively is not something that they necessarily buy into. Do you foresee it creating tension going forward?
it would always create tension when you're asking someone who is already in the legislature to make way for someone else. But I think that it can be handled politically. It may be that the person will be removed from the legislature, but they're going to find a space for that person either in the organization or elsewhere. In the same way that, remember, he came in when Hun Sen had to move out of the province to go to national because they had not complied with the 50-50% in terms of women. I'm sure that, if you leave aside internal politics, it's something that is going to be handled. I'm just surprised that that issue would have gone out publicly with the person saying he's not going to resign and or the Youth League issuing a statement when in fact it may be that there were still a lot of discussions that are currently taking place. Of course, the Youth League would always want to see young people, but young people, it really depends what it is. I mean, if you look at the Gauteng executive, except maybe for one or two people, it is made up of primarily young people. They're not youth, as in less than 35, but they also, most of them are below the age of 50.
How significant an impact does what happens provincially in the province have, especially in a year where we're going into local elections? And I would imagine that part of what is on the minds of the ANC officials in the province is trying to retain or trying to gain back some of the metros.
Indeed, which is why I think that regardless of how the decision to bring Pakstawu may have happened, I think if you take into account his vast experience in dealing with issues of development in Johannesburg, as well as issues of finances, and the fact that he was both the chairperson of SALGA and also involved in international local municipalities, he would be better placed, hopefully, to help with issues of development, because without economic development in Gauteng, you are not going to be able to help fire up the economy nationally, because you rely primarily on Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, and the Western Cape.
Mr. Mbazima-Shilowa, I'm going to push this a bit further and say and ask about just, of course, this has left another gap in cabinet. And we know that there have been different calls from, depending on who you're looking at in civil society and also in other political organizations, opposition parties, for the president to have a cabinet reshuffle. Do you see him using some of these gaps as an opportunity to do that?
I mean, the president, if he doesn't use that opportunity, he'll be confirming what others believe, that deputy ministers are simply glorified positions, because if he can go on without a deputy minister for that long in minerals energy, what then is the use of such a person? Obviously, there are departments that require deputy ministers, accepting that they do not sit in the cabinet, but there are other departments where, people are just simply being deployed there to balance internal political issues. So yes, there should be pressure, both for him to bring in deputy ministers if he so require, but I think taking into account what is happening with the public sector, them saying to workers in the public sector, we cannot afford a wage increase, then asking the public sector to tighten their belt, he should reshuffle his cabinet, but he must also reduce his cabinet, in my view. Then, in that way, you are able to show public sector workers in the country that you mean business. If you don't, it simply shows that you're just trying to bargain with public sector workers, but you don't think there's a need to reduce the public debt.
Former Gauteng Premier Mbazima-Shilowa, thank you for your time on News at Prime.